Hey, and welcome to The Explainer. All right, get ready, because today we are diving into a thinker who is going to completely rewire how you see the world, from your school to your job to your doctor's office. We are talking about Michel Foucault and his absolutely game-changing ideas about power. So let's just start with a basic question. When I say the word power, what image pops into your head? What does it actually look like?
Yeah, for most of us, it's probably something like this, right? A king's crown, a judge's gavel, that big, imposing desk in the corner office. These are the classic top-down symbols of authority.
And this is the traditional view, that power is a thing, something that a few people at the top have and the rest of us don't. It's something they use to give orders, to say no, and to punish. But what if that's only a tiny, tiny part of the story?
And this is where the French philosopher Michel Foucault comes in, and he just turns that whole idea on its head with these incredible provocative statements. He argued that the most powerful kinds of power are the ones we don't even notice.
Okay, so let's get into it. Foucault basically gives us a whole new way to see power by showing us its two hidden rules. And these rules reveal that power is so much more subtle and so much more everywhere than we could ever imagine.
So, rule number 1. Foucault says power isn't a thing you can hold like a scepter. Nope, it's a relationship, a dynamic that flows through everything and everyone. It's not just some force from on high yelling stop. It's all around us. And a lot of the time, it's actually productive. It's the little whisper that tells you, do this.
And that brings us to his second rule, which, honestly, is the big one. It's what he called the power-knowledge nexus. The idea here is that power and knowledge are basically inseparable, two sides of the same coin. Power doesn't just work with brute force. Its most clever trick is creating what we all agree to call the truth.
Just think about it for a second. Entire fields of knowledge create these categories that just completely shape our reality. Psychiatry draws a line in the sand between what's normal and insane. Economics tells us who is productive. The law decides what's legal versus criminal. These aren't just neutral scientific facts, they are powerful systems for sorting, managing, and controlling people.
Okay, so a really crucial point here is that the way power works isn't static. It has changed, dramatically over history. It's shifted from this big, loud public show to something much quieter, something more like constant surveillance. Foucault kind of traces this evolution through three main stages. You start with what he calls sovereign power, then you move to disciplinary power, and finally you get to biopower. And each one is a completely different strategy for managing human beings. So, way back in the day, in the age of kings and queens, you had sovereign power. This was power as a massive public performance. Think of a public execution. The whole point was to put the king's absolute authority on display for everyone to see and fear. It was brutal, it was direct, you could not miss it.
But then, starting around the 18th century, a new kind of power starts to take over. It's way more subtle, way more efficient. Foucault calls this disciplinary power. And this power isn't interested in making a bloody spectacle, it's interested in training. The goal is to carefully shape individuals into useful, productive, and obedient subjects, what he famously called docile bodies.
And Foucault didn't just pull this out of thin air. He was like a historical detective. He spent years buried in archives, digging through old prison records, military manuals, school timetables. He wanted to see precisely how these ordinary, everyday places became the new factories for this kind of subtle control.
And all that research led him to what he saw as the perfect symbol, the perfect metaphor for modern disciplinary power, a fascinating architectural design for a prison called the panopticon.
The design is just genius in a really terrifying way. So you have a guard tower in the center, and it's surrounded by a circle of cells. The guard in the tower can see into every single cell, but the prisoners, because of the lighting, they can't see into the tower. They never know if they're being watched at any specific moment. So what's the result? They have to behave as if they are always being watched. They start to police their own behavior. The power becomes internalized. They basically become their own guards.
But even that wasn't the end of the story. Disciplinary power was just one part of the puzzle. Over time, power zoomed out. It expanded its focus from just controlling the individual body to managing the life of the population as a whole.
Foucault called this new level biopower. Now, this isn't about punishment or individual training. This is power as large-scale administration. It's about using statistics, public health data, and government policies to manage things like birth rates, hygiene, and life expectancy,
all to make the entire population as healthy, efficient, and productive as possible.
And this brings us to the final and maybe the most unsettling part of Foucault's entire theory. How all of this modern, invisible power doesn't just control us. It actually creates us. It makes you who you are.
So what's the endgame here? If power isn't just about forbidding us and punishing us, what is it actually trying to do? The ultimate goal is something Foucault calls subjection. This is the incredibly subtle process where we're turned into subjects. We absorb the rules, the norms, the truths of our society so deeply that we start to enforce them on ourselves. We willingly take on the roles and identities that society has laid out for us.
So, you see, the big takeaway isn't just that we're being bossed around or oppressed. Foucault's making a much, much bigger claim. He's saying that this whole invisible web of power and knowledge is what actively constructs our identity, our desires, our very sense of who we are.
Now, I know this can all sound pretty bleak, but here's the twist. For Foucault, actually understanding this system, seeing this invisible prison, that is precisely where freedom begins.
And that is why this all matters so much. By mapping out this invisible architecture of power, Foucault hands us the blueprint. He gives us the tools to start asking questions, because once you can see the rules of the game, you can start thinking about how to play it differently.
And that leaves us with one last, really provocative idea. For Foucault, true freedom might not be about finding some perfect world with no power. He'd say that's impossible. Instead, maybe it starts with something much smaller, much more personal. A critical awareness and a constant, stubborn refusal to be governed in exactly the ways we are told we must be.